Let us talk about one of the weirdest periods in modern economic history, the years from 2017 to 2021. It was a time of huge contradictions, big policy experiments, and a global crisis that changed everything. Understanding this era is key to figuring out where we are today. When 2017 kicked off, the US economy was already in a pretty good spot. The recovery from the 2008 financial crisis was chugging along, and unemployment was steadily falling. The new administration came in with a promise to supercharge growth, and their first major move was the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. This was a massive overhaul of the tax code, the biggest in decades. The idea was simple: by cutting corporate taxes from 35% down to 21% and also lowering individual income taxes for many businesses would have more cash to invest, hire, and expand. Consumers would have more money in their pockets to spend. It was classic supply-side economics. Did it work? Well, the answer is complicated. In the short term, we did see a bump. Some companies announced bonuses for their employees and stock buybacks surged. The stock market, which was already on an upward trend, continued to climb to new highs. Optimism was in the air. For the average person, the lower tax withholding meant a little extra in each paycheck. So, on the surface, things looked pretty good. The unemployment rate kept falling, eventually hitting a 50-year low of just 3.5%. We saw job growth across many sectors, and for the first time in a while, wage growth started to pick up, especially for lower income workers. This was the strong jobs part of the story, and it felt like a real economic boom. But there was a catch, a big one. Those tax cuts weren't paid for. They added trillions of dollars to the national debt. The argument was that the cuts would pay for themselves through higher economic growth, but that didn't fully materialize. The US was running a massive budget deficit even during a period of strong economic expansion, which is highly unusual. Typically, you expect deficits to shrink when the economy is good and grow during a recession. We were doing the opposite, essentially running the economy hot on borrowed money. This set the stage for long-term fiscal challenges that we're still grappling with today. Then came the second major policy experiment, trade wars. The administration argued that the US had been taken advantage of by its trading partners for decades, pointing to large trade deficits and the loss of manufacturing jobs. The solution? Tariffs. The first big salvo was fired with tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from around the world, including allies like Canada and the European Union. The goal was to protect domestic industries and bring back jobs. This was followed by a series of escalating tariffs specifically targeting China, leading to a full-blown trade war. Billions of dollars in goods were suddenly more expensive. The effects were immediate and disruptive. Companies that relied on imported materials saw their costs spike. For example, a company that used Chinese-made components to assemble a product in the US suddenly had to pay a 25% tax on those parts. They had three choices: absorb the cost and make less profit, pass the cost on to consumers by raising prices, or try to find a new supplier outside of China. This reshuffling of global supply chains was a massive undertaking. Some companies did move production, but often to other low-cost countries like Vietnam or Mexico, not necessarily back to the US. For consumers, the impact was felt in the form of higher prices on everything from washing machines to sneakers. The trade war created a lot of uncertainty. Businesses became hesitant to make big investments when the rules of global trade could change with a single tweet. Farmers were hit particularly hard when China retaliated with its own tariffs on American agricultural products, like soybeans. The government had to roll out a multi-billion-dollar aid package for farmers just to keep them afloat. So while the intention was to help American workers and industries, the trade war ended up creating a mix of winners and losers and a whole lot of economic anxiety. So you had this strange situation: on one hand, a strong labor market and consumer spending fueled by tax cuts. On the other hand, rising uncertainty, disrupted supply chains, and higher costs because of the trade war. The economy was sending mixed signals. Growth was decent, but not the explosive boom that was promised, and it was being propped up by a mountain of debt. It was an economy walking a tightrope. And then, in early 2020, the tightrope snapped. the COVID-19 pandemic wasn't an economic policy, but it became the single most powerful economic force the world had seen in a century. It was like hitting a brick wall at full speed. To stop the spread of the virus, countries around the world went into lockdown, businesses closed, flights were grounded, and millions of people were told to stay home. The economic shock was historic. In the span of just a few weeks, the US unemployment rate skyrocketed from that 50-year low of 3.5% to nearly 15%. Tens of millions of jobs vanished. The economy, which had been growing, contracted at a breathtaking pace. This was a completely different kind of recession. It wasn't caused by a financial bubble bursting or a gradual slowdown. It was a sudden, deliberate freezing of economic activity. It created what I call the two separate economies. You have the pre-COVID economy of 2017 to early 2020, and the post-COVID economy from then on. They feel like completely different worlds. The government's response to this crisis was as massive as the shock itself. The Federal Reserve slashed interest rates back to zero and began pumping trillions of dollars into the financial system to prevent a total collapse. Congress passed the CARES Act, the largest economic rescue package in American history. It included direct payments to most Americans, a huge boost to unemployment benefits, and forgivable loans for small businesses to keep their workers on the payroll. This was a complete reversal from the usual economic playbook. Instead of letting the recession run its course, the government stepped in to replace lost income on an unprecedented scale. This massive intervention prevented an even deeper economic depression. It kept millions of families afloat and allowed many businesses to survive. But it also had unintended consequences. With people stuck at home, spending patterns shifted dramatically. We stopped spending money on services like restaurants, travel, and concerts, and started spending it on goods, new laptops for remote work, exercise equipment for home gyms, and furniture to make our living spaces more comfortable. This huge surge in demand for goods collided head-on with the pandemic disrupted supply chains. Factories were closed or running at reduced capacity, shipping ports were backed up, and all those tariffs were still in place. This imbalance between soaring demand and crippled supply was the perfect recipe for inflation. Prices for used cars, lumber, and electronics started to climb, and all that money the government pumped into the economy. It also added trillions more to the national debt, compounding the fiscal issues that started with the tax cuts years earlier. By the end of this period in 2021, we were left with a very different economy. Jobs were starting to come back, but inflation was becoming a serious concern. Supply chains were a mess, and the national debt was at a record high. So why does this strange 4-year period still matter so much? Because it was a real-world stress test for our economy. It showed us just how quickly massive policy shocks, whether it's a tax overhaul, a trade war, or a pandemic response, can ripple through the system. They can change prices, redirect growth, and alter business and consumer confidence in the blink of an eye. The decisions made during those years, the tax cuts, the tariffs, and the massive pandemic relief are still shaping the inflation we see, the interest rates we pay, and the national debt we owe today. It's a powerful lesson in how interconnected everything is and how policies designed to solve one problem can sometimes create a whole new set of challenges down the road. Understanding this weird economic era is not just about looking back. It's about having the context to navigate the economy we live in right now. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this breakdown helpful, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the forces that shape our world. See you in the next one.